budget. Let's move from that discussion to another important one. There is growing criticism over the Social Development's draft amendments to the COVID-19 Social Relief of Distress Grant, 350 rands for short. Now, there are regulations that have just been published. Now, despite the extension of the SRD grant until next year, the Universal Basic Income Coalition says the regulations will negatively affect the beneficiaries. The organization has further slammed the cutting down of the grant's budget by 3 billion rand, saying 350 is well below half of the food poverty line. Speaking to us now about this situation is Dr. Kelle Howson, who is the Labour and Social Security Senior Researcher at the Institute for Economic Justice. Dr. Howson, thank you very much for your time. Let's begin with the value of the 350 rand. You are saying it's well below the halfway mark. In other words, it's been cut in half, that even the beneficiaries of this are now not able to stave off hunger. What do you base this on?
So, just to correct you, we don't say it's been cut in half, but what we say is it's below half of the food poverty line, the current food poverty line, which is 760 rand. So the food poverty line is the minimum, absolute minimum amount that a person needs to meet their daily caloric intake requirements, basically to not be starving. So now the Social Relief of Distress Grant is woefully inadequate of that threshold. The food poverty line has increased quite significantly in recent years and months because the cost of living has gone up so substantially, and we've seen a very high rate of food inflation in particular. So food has become more and more expensive, and that has eroded the value of the 350 rand grant, especially when we consider that more than 90% of people spend that grant on food.
Yeah. So you've then, based on your statement, you say you've instituted legal action to challenge the value of 350 rands, but also what you are saying is the exclusionary management of the grant. Explain that a little further to us.
Yes, the government has the constitutional obligation to progressively realise the right to social assistance within available resources. So what that means is that they need to build on the foundation that's already there, and they can't roll back access to social assistance. They can't make it harder to get. They can't make the value, they can't retrogress or erode the value. So that's the basis of our court challenge. The challenge is being brought by the Institute for Economic Justice along with our partners in the Universal Basic Income Coalition, #PayTheGrants. So we're not only arguing that the value has been retrogressed and that that's unconstitutional, we're also arguing that fewer people can get the grant now than they could at its peak. So at its peak in March 2022, there were 10.9 million people getting the grant. Now that figure is hovering just above 8 million. And that's for a number of reasons. A number of complex procedural reasons, but those flow from the fact that National Treasury has allocated an inadequate budget for the grant, and they've cut the budget over the last few years. So that forced the Department of Social Development to find ways to exclude otherwise deserving beneficiaries. One way they do that, the main way, is they cap the income threshold, the income eligibility threshold, at 624 rand. So if you have more than 624 rand a month, that means you don't qualify for the SRD grant. And that's ridiculous, especially in light of the fact that the food poverty line is now 760 rand per month. Then add on to that a number of other barriers. For instance, you can only apply for the grant online. That excludes a lot of people. You need to have a bank account in practice to receive the grant. That excludes a lot of people. And the appeals process for challenging unfair exclusion is just simply not up to standard. It doesn't give people justice.
Yeah. Let's focus the attention a little bit on the punitive clauses of the regulations that were recently published. What worries you most about that?
So we knew that there was going to be an amendment to the regulations because they were due to end at the end of March 2024. So we were expecting this amendment, which simply extends the grant until 2025. But the government has taken the opportunity with the extension to add further clauses to the regulations that we're concerned could harm beneficiaries, especially in the context of the fact that the government has looked for ways to exclude people from the grant over a long period of time. So the two new clauses that we're concerned about, one is that the government is giving itself the power to recover monies from beneficiaries if they have been deemed to have benefited irregularly or were not entitled to benefit. That's the language that's used. Essentially what it means is if they're seen to have benefited fraudulently, the government will take back the money. And at first glance, that seems reasonable. However, we're just concerned about the fact that this gives the government the power to retrospectively change their decision, and that could impact beneficiaries who did benefit correctly if they apply inaccurate verification systems to past beneficiaries, and we know that the verification systems they apply are inaccurate. So that's one issue. The other issue, even more worrying, is that they're giving themselves the power to cancel payments that have been pending for 90 days. Now, they say that this only happens if beneficiary is untraceable. So you apply for the grant, you're approved for the grant, and then a lot of people have seen that their payments have simply been pending. They haven't been paid out their grants. This is a very common experience, and it affects up to 13% of beneficiaries based on the latest data that we have. With this amendment, the government is shifting the blame for their faulty systems onto those beneficiaries. And just to give you an illustration of one of the reasons why people don't get paid, the government allows people, 5 people to use one smartphone to apply. And this is an acknowledgement of the fact that not everybody has a smartphone. So you can borrow the phone of your friend or your neighbor or somebody in your community. But you can't be expected to have ongoing access to that phone in order to, for instance, receive links to verify your identity, receive notifications from SASA that you need to provide additional details. And these are the cases that the government is referring to as beneficiaries' own fault for being untraceable. And when they cancel those payments that have been pending after 90 days, that's going to be a big chunk of the SRD grant budget that they're essentially writing off and washing their hands of responsibility for.
Yeah. So it would seem to me that the central question, therefore, is whose responsibility is it to assess whether the applicant is entitled to benefit and which are those that are not entitled?
It's SASA and DSD's responsibility to fairly assess eligibility for the grant. The problem that we have at the moment is that they've greatly overshot the mark. So they're worried about including people who aren't eligible. That's a tiny, tiny fraction of people who apply for that grant. We don't have the exact figures, but it's completely dwarfed by the number of exclusion errors from the grant. That means people who should have gotten the grant that didn't. We calculate that that's about 50%. About 8 million more people should be receiving that grant that aren't, because DSD and SASA are being very overzealous in excluding people, and that's comes down again to the inadequate budget that was allocated by Treasury. So these are all of the complex issues that we are challenging in our court case.
If I've done my research properly, Dr. Howson, at the last check, I think it's about 9 million people that are receiving this grant, and you are saying that 8 million more people are supposed to be receiving this. Government has been saying since this was instituted, this 350 rand, they've been saying that per year it is costing them 44 billion rand. What are you going to say when they say we simply don't have the money to either increase this amount to 750 that you spoke about, nor can we include so many people onto this SRD?
So first to say, they're now spending 33.6 billion on the grant. So the budget has been cut significantly from 44 billion. But to that argument about unaffordability, we would say fiscal policy doesn't work like that and the economy doesn't work like that. Putting money into the SRD grant and other essential areas of public spending is not throwing money into a hole. It's investing in the economy and investing in people. We're in a situation right now where we've got serious economic stagnation. We're not seeing growth. The levels of taxation that the government is collecting are lower than required. What we need is to stimulate the economy from the ground up, and that's exactly what spending on things like the SRD grant does. There's so much research out there that shows that when people receive cash transfers like the SRD grant, they spend it in their local communities, so they're contributing to demand in their local communities, supporting local businesses and supporting job creation in their communities, and they put it into livelihood strategies. They invest in productive assets, they start businesses, they improve their existing businesses. So spending on the SRD grant is an investment in the future of the economy, and there are many available resources that government can use to do that. It just requires a switch from this dogmatic fiscal policy that's been focused on austerity and debt consolidation to a fiscal policy that focuses on inclusive growth, putting people first and putting socioeconomic rights first.
Very briefly, if you can, these regulations are out. I believe they were published on Wednesday by the Social Development Minister. What are you going to do to make sure that it does not become the law? In other words, the necessary amendments are made so that what you are fighting for is what ends up becoming the law.
We will be submitting our comments on the grants, on the regulations through the usual process, and all of our partners will be doing the same. We would encourage your viewers, if they feel strongly about this issue, to submit their comments. And we will also continue with our court case. You know, we've tried to engage constructively over a period of years with government departments on these issues, and we haven't seen any improvement on the issues that we've raised. So going to court is kind of a last resort. We've done so reluctantly, but the case is pending and it deals with many of these issues that we've talked about. So we hope that if the regulations are published as is and our comments are once again not taken into account, that we will see some remedy through that court case process.
Dr. Kelle Howson is a senior researcher at the Institute for Economic Justice, specifically the division that deals with labor and social security. All right.